The call she ignored. Hello everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Today I want to share a story that might make you think about the people you love and the moments we often take for granted. This is a story about family, about regret, and about a phone call that almost came too late. It's the story of a girl named Emma. One quiet night, she sat by her window looking at the city, lights outside. In her hand was a phone, and on the screen were two words she hadn't thought about for months. Dad blocked. 3 months ago, she decided to block her father's number. At the time, it felt like the right decision. But what she didn't know was that one small choice would change everything. And sometimes in life, the calls we ignore are the ones we will miss the most. Emma sat by the window, staring at the glowing city, lights outside. The soft blue light from her phone reflected in her tired eyes. On the screen was a single line of text. Dad blocked. 3 months ago, she had blocked him. At the time, it felt like the only choice she had left. Every conversation between them had turned into an argument. Every argument ended the same way, her father's strict voice, her rising anger, and finally the sound of a door slamming shut. But tonight felt different. Something about the silence in her apartment felt heavier than usual. Emma stared at her phone longer than she should have. And for the first time since that day, a quiet thought slipped into her mind. What if I made a mistake? 3 months earlier, everything had exploded in the kitchen of her childhood home. Emma stood near the doorway with her backpack already on her shoulders, ready to leave. David, her father, stood across the room with his arms crossed, his expression firm and unyielding. Emma, you're not dropping out of college, he said. I'm not dropping out. Emma shot back. I'm choosing my own path. You're being reckless, he replied. And you're controlling. The room fell into a painful silence. Both of them stood there, breathing heavily, neither willing to take a step back. Then Emma did something she had never done before. She walked out. That night her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Dad, Dad, Dad. The calls kept coming one after another. At first she ignored them. She placed the phone face down on the table and tried to distract herself. But the ringing continued. After the 10th call, frustration finally took over. Emma picked up the phone, opened her father's contact, and stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she pressed block. The ringing stopped instantly. The silence that followed felt strangely powerful. For a moment, it felt like freedom, like she had finally taken control of her life. But freedom sometimes comes with loneliness. Weeks passed. Emma moved into a small apartment across town and began working part-time while trying to pursue her dream of becoming an artist. She painted late into the night, filling canvases with colors that reflected both her hope and her confusion. Yet something was missing. One afternoon, her phone rang again. This time it was her mother. Emma, your dad misses you, Sarah said gently. Emma didn't respond. He just doesn't know how to show it. Emma's voice was barely a whisper. He never listens. Her mother sighed softly. He listens more than you think. Emma didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. A few weeks later, she returned home to pick up some old books she had left behind. As she stepped inside, the house felt strangely quiet. Too quiet. Then she heard voices coming from the kitchen. Her parents. Her mother sounded worried. David, you should tell her. Her father's voice was weak. Not yet. Emma froze in the hallway. Something was wrong. She slowly walked into the kitchen. Both of her parents turned to look at her. For the first time, Emma noticed how pale her father looked. What's going on? She asked. Silence filled the room. Then her mother spoke the words Emma would never forget. Your dad is sick. Emma felt the air leave her lungs. In that moment, every missed call echoed in her mind. All the anger, all the silence. I blocked you, she whispered. Her father gave a small, tired smile. I know. You knew. I tried calling anyway. Tears filled Emma's eyes. She realized that sometimes the hardest thing to face isn't anger, it's regret. Months later, Emma stood on a small stage at her first art exhibition. Her paintings lined the walls around her. Her phone buzzed. A message from her mom appeared. Dad is watching. Emma looked out into the crowd and smiled softly. Because sometimes the calls we ignore are the ones we wish we had answered. Emma kept staring at the message on her phone long after the exhibition ended. Dad is watching. She slowly lifted her eyes and scanned the crowd again. People were walking around the gallery, quietly admiring the paintings. Some whispered to each other. Others stood silently, studying the colors and emotions captured on the canvas. But Emma was looking for only one face. Then she saw him. Near the back of the room, standing beside her mother, was David. He looked thinner than before, and there were faint shadows under his eyes. But he was smiling. A small, proud smile. For a moment, Emma couldn't move. All the memories rushed back at once. The arguments, the silence, the blocked calls, the hospital room. Her heart tightened. Slowly, she stepped off the stage and began walking toward him. David noticed her approaching and straightened slightly, as if he wanted to look stronger than he actually felt. When Emma finally reached him, neither of them spoke immediately. They simply stood there, looking at each other. Then David glanced at the paintings on the wall. "You did all this?" he asked quietly. Emma nodded. "Yes." He studied one painting in particular. It showed a girl standing by a window, looking out at a city full of lights. David smiled gently. "You always did see the world differently," he said. Emma swallowed hard. "I thought you hated this dream." David shook his head slowly. "I was afraid of it." Emma frowned slightly. "Afraid?" He nodded. "I was afraid the world would be too hard on you. I wanted you to have something stable, something safe." Emma looked down at her hands. "And I thought you didn't believe in me." David's voice softened. "I always believed in you." There was a long pause between them. Then Emma took a small step forward and hugged him. At first David seemed surprised, but then he wrapped his arms around her as well. For a moment neither of them said anything. Some emotions don't need words. After a while Emma pulled back slightly. "Dad." "I'm sorry," she said. David smiled again. "I know." Emma laughed softly through her tears. "That's it? Just I know?" He nodded. "That's enough." Her mother, Sarah, watched them quietly from the side, her eyes shining with relief. For the first time in months, the distance between them had disappeared. Later that evening, after most of the guests had left, Emma and her father walked slowly through the gallery together. David stopped in front of another painting. This one showed a phone lying on a table, its screen glowing in the dark. Emma followed his gaze. "That one is called Missed Calls," she said. David chuckled softly. "Seems fitting." Emma took out her phone. Without saying anything, she opened her contacts. She scrolled down to one name. Dad. There was a small icon next to it. Blocked. Emma tapped the screen. Then she pressed unblock. She showed the phone to him. "No more missed calls," she said. David looked at her, his eyes warm. "Good," he replied. "Because sometimes in life, we think we are protecting ourselves from pain. But what we are really doing is blocking the people who love us the most." And Emma had finally learned something she would never forget. No matter how loud the arguments become, no matter how far we walk away, family is the call that should never be ignored. The gallery lights slowly dimmed as the last visitors left the building. Outside, the night air was cool and quiet. Emma locked the door behind her and stepped out onto the sidewalk with her parents. For a moment, none of them spoke. The city looked peaceful at night. Streetlights stretched down the road, and cars passed slowly in the distance. Emma looked at her father walking beside her. His steps were slower than she remembered, but he was there. "And that was enough." "Are you tired?" Emma asked softly. David smiled. "A little, but tonight was worth it." Sarah wrapped her coat tighter and looked between them. For months, she had watched both of them suffer in silence. Tonight felt like the first breath after a long storm. They walked together toward the small parking lot. Emma suddenly remembered something. She pulled out her phone. "Dad," she said, "call me." David looked confused. "Why?" "Just do it." He took out his phone and dialed her number. For a second Emma held her breath. Then her phone rang. The sound felt strangely emotional. Emma looked at the screen. "Dad calling." She answered immediately. "Hello," she said with a small smile. David laughed quietly. "I'm standing right here." I know, she said. But this time I wanted to answer. They both laughed, the tension of the past months finally fading away. A few weeks later, Emma visited the hospital again for one of her father's regular checkups. The doctors were hopeful. Treatment was working better than expected. It wasn't an easy road, but it was a road they were walking together now. While sitting in the waiting room, David watched Emma sketching in a small notebook. You never stop drawing, do you? He asked. Emma shook her head. It helps me think. David nodded slowly. You know, when you were little, you used to draw on the walls. Emma groaned. Mom told you to repaint the whole living room. Yes, he laughed, but secretly I didn't mind. Emma looked surprised. You didn't? No, he said softly, because even then I could see how much you loved creating things. Emma paused, her pencil hovering over the page. So, you always knew? David nodded. I just didn't know how to let you go. Emma reached across and squeezed his hand. You didn't lose me. He smiled. No, I didn't. Months passed. Emma's art career slowly began to grow. A few galleries showed interest in her work. Online, people started sharing her paintings. One night, she finished a new piece. It showed a phone glowing in the dark beside a window full of city lights. At the bottom corner, she wrote a small title. Answer while you still can. The next morning, she visited her parents again and brought the painting with her. David looked at it quietly for a long time. Then he said something Emma would remember forever. Life gives us many calls, he said. Some from opportunity. Some from strangers. He looked at her and smiled gently. But the most important ones, he paused, come from the people who love us. Emma nodded. And this time, she would never miss that call again. Life slowly returned to a new normal after that night at the gallery. Emma began visiting her parents more often. Sometimes she stayed for dinner. Other times she simply came by to sit with her father and talk. The house that once felt heavy with silence now carried a softer, warmer feeling. One Sunday afternoon, Emma arrived with a bag of groceries. Sarah looked surprised. Since when do you bring food? She teased. Emma laughed. Since I realized cooking at home is cheaper than ordering takeout every night. David was sitting at the kitchen table reading a newspaper. When he saw Emma walk in, he folded it neatly and placed it aside. You're here early, he said. Emma placed the groceries on the counter. I thought we could cook together. Her father raised an eyebrow. You cook? Emma shrugged playfully. We're about to find out. Soon the kitchen filled with familiar sounds again. The chopping of vegetables, the sizzling of a pan, and quiet laughter between conversations. For the first time in a long while, the kitchen didn't feel like the place where their worst argument had happened. It felt like home again. Later that evening, Emma stayed behind after dinner while her mother washed the dishes. David walked outside onto the small porch and sat on the old wooden chair he used every evening. Emma joined him. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with soft shades of orange and purple. They sat in silence for a moment. Then David spoke. You know, he said slowly, when you left that night, I kept thinking about what I could have said differently. Emma looked at him. I thought about it too, she admitted. David nodded. But sometimes, he continued, life doesn't give us perfect conversations. Emma smiled faintly. No, it doesn't. He leaned back in the chair and looked up at the sky. But it gives us second chances. Emma followed his gaze toward the fading sunlight. And we were lucky enough to get one, she said. David glanced at her with a proud expression. You built something beautiful with your art, he said. I'm glad you didn't give up. Emma looked down at her hands. I almost did, she confessed. Why? She hesitated before answering. Because for a long time, I thought I had lost my family. David shook his head gently. You never lost us. Emma felt a warmth in her chest she hadn't felt in months. The truth was simple. Sometimes distance doesn't break a family. Silence does. But once someone decides to speak again, the distance slowly disappears. As the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, Emma pulled out her phone and checked the time. Then she smiled. Dad, she said. Yes. Call me again. David chuckled. You really like that, don't you? Emma nodded. It reminds me of something important. What's that? Emma looked at him. That some calls are worth answering every single time. David picked up his phone and dialed her number. A second later, Emma's phone rang in the quiet evening air. This time, she answered before the first ring finished. And both of them knew they would never let silence come between them again. After that evening on the porch, something quietly changed between Emma and her father. They didn't suddenly become the perfect family. They still disagreed sometimes. David was still strict. Emma was still stubborn. But now, when disagreements appeared, they talked instead of walking away. And that made all the difference. A few weeks later, Emma invited her parents to visit her apartment for the first time. It was small, simple, and filled with canvases leaning against the walls. Paintbrushes sat in jars on every table, and the faint smell of oil paint hung in the air. David slowly walked around the room, observing everything carefully. "This is where the artist works?" he asked. Emma smiled. "Yep. My entire empire." He stopped in front of one unfinished painting. It showed a father and daughter sitting by a window, looking at the city lights. David tilted his head. "Is that supposed to be us?" Emma shrugged shyly. "Maybe." He looked at the painting for a long moment. Then he nodded. "You should finish it." Emma looked surprised. "You like it?" David turned toward her. "I like anything that comes from your heart." Emma felt a small warmth spread through her chest. For years she had waited to hear something like that. Later that evening they all sat around Emma's tiny dining table eating takeout noodles. The table was barely big enough for 3 people, and Sarah kept bumping her elbow against a stack of sketchbooks. "This place is smaller than your childhood bedroom," she joked. Emma laughed. "True, but at least no one tells me when to go to bed." David raised an eyebrow. "You should still sleep earlier." Emma rolled her eyes. Some things never changed. But this time the comment didn't lead to an argument. It led to laughter. Over the next few months, Emma's life became busier. More galleries showed interest in her work. A few collectors even bought her paintings. It wasn't fame or fortune, but it was a beginning. And every time something good happened, Emma made one phone call to her father. Sometimes the conversation was short. Sometimes it lasted an hour. Sometimes they talked about art. Sometimes about nothing at all. But the important part was simple. They talked. One evening Emma was finishing a new painting when her phone buzzed. "Dad calling," she smiled and answered. "Hey." David's voice sounded cheerful. "Guess what?" "What?" "I told my friend at work about your art exhibition." Emma laughed. "Dad, you don't have to promote me to everyone." "I'm not promoting you," he replied. "I'm bragging." Emma paused for a moment. "Bragging?" "Yes." "Why?" David's answer came, without hesitation. "Because I'm proud of you." Emma didn't speak for a few seconds. Those 4 words meant more than he probably realized. For years, she had chased dreams hoping to prove something. But hearing her father say he was proud, that was the moment she truly felt successful. Later that night, Emma opened a fresh canvas. She dipped her brush into paint and began working slowly. The painting she started that evening would become one of her most important pieces. It showed a phone ringing on a small table. The screen glowed softly in the dark. And beside it, a hand reaching out to answer. At the bottom corner, she wrote a small title. "The Call That Changed Everything." Because sometimes, the smallest moment in life, a single phone call, can bring people back together. As Emma's art slowly gained attention, her life became busier than she had ever imagined. Days were filled with painting, replying to emails, and preparing for small exhibitions. Nights were often quiet, spent alone in her apartment with music playing softly while she worked on new ideas. But no matter how busy her life became, there was one habit Emma never forgot. She always answered when her father called. Sometimes the call came early in the morning. "Did you eat breakfast?" David would ask. Emma would sigh dramatically. "Dad, I'm not 12. And that means you shouldn't eat breakfast?" Emma would laugh. "Fine. I'll eat something." Other times he called late at night. "Are you still painting?" he would ask. "Yes." "You should sleep." "I will." "You said that yesterday." Emma smiled every time. Some people might find those calls annoying, but Emma had learned something important. Those small, ordinary conversations were the moments that built a life. One afternoon, Emma received an email from a larger gallery in another city. They wanted to feature several of her paintings in an upcoming exhibition. Emma read the message twice, just to make sure she understood it correctly. Then she grabbed her phone immediately. She didn't hesitate. She called her father. David answered after the second ring. "Hello, Dad," Emma said excitedly. "I got invited to a gallery show in Chicago." There was a brief silence. Then David asked a simple question. "Is that good news?" Emma laughed. "Yes. It's very good news." David's voice sounded proud. "I knew it." Emma sat down on the edge of her bed, smiling. "You always say that after something happens." "That's because I always knew you could do it." Emma shook her head. "You didn't sound very confident 3 months ago." David chuckled softly. "That's because I was afraid." Emma grew quiet for a moment. Then she said something honest. "I was afraid too." "Of what?" he asked. Emma looked around her apartment. The paintings, the brushes, the unfinished canvases. "Afraid that I might fail." David answered calmly. "Failure isn't the worst thing." Emma frowned. "No." "No," he said. "The worst thing is not trying." Emma thought about those words long after the call ended. Her father had spent most of his life working long hours, trying to give his family a stable future. He believed in security, in preparation, in responsibility. Emma believed in dreams, in creativity, in freedom. For years, those two beliefs had clashed. But now Emma realized something important. They were never enemies. They were simply two different ways of caring about the future. A week later, Emma began preparing her paintings for the exhibition. She carefully wrapped each canvas and labeled every box. One painting caught her attention. It was the one with the phone glowing in the dark. The one titled, "The Call That Changed Everything." Emma ran her fingers gently across the edge of the frame. Then she smiled. Because that painting didn't just represent a moment. It represented a lesson. Sometimes we believe we have endless time to fix things, to call someone back, to say sorry, to reconnect. But life doesn't always give us unlimited chances. Emma picked up her phone again. She opened her contact list. She looked at one name, Dad. For a second, she hesitated. Then she pressed call. The phone rang once, twice. Then David answered. "Emma?" Emma smiled softly. "I just wanted to hear your voice." On the other end of the line, David laughed. "You called just for that?" "Yes." There was a small pause. Then he said something simple. "I'm glad you did." Because sometimes, the best calls in life don't need a reason. The day of the Chicago exhibition arrived faster than Emma expected. For weeks she had prepared every detail, packaging the paintings, arranging transportation, writing descriptions for each piece. Still, as the day finally came, she felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Emma stood outside the gallery building, looking up at the tall glass windows. Her name was printed on a small banner near the entrance. Emma Carter. New Works Exhibition. Seeing it made her heart beat faster. Just a year ago, this moment would have felt impossible. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. Without thinking, she called her father. The phone rang once before David answered. "Big day?" he asked. Emma smiled. "How did you know I was calling about that?" "I know my daughter," he said. Emma looked through the gallery doors where workers were still adjusting lights and arranging paintings. "I'm nervous," she admitted. David's voice remained calm. "That means it matters to you." Emma leaned against the railing outside. "What if people don't like the paintings? What if they love them?" David replied. Emma laughed softly. "You always do that." "Do what?" "Answer my worries with another question." David chuckled. "That's because worries rarely have answers." Emma thought about that. Then she took a deep breath. "Dad, are you coming?" There was a small pause. "I wouldn't miss it," he said. Emma smiled wider. "I'll save you a good spot." That evening the gallery slowly filled with visitors. Soft music played in the background while people walked from painting to painting. Some whispered to each other. Others stood silently, studying the colors and emotions captured on the canvas. Emma greeted guests and answered questions about her work. But every few minutes, her eyes drifted toward the entrance. She was waiting. Then finally she saw them. Her mother walked in first, wearing a warm smile. And behind her was David. He moved a little slower than he used to, but his posture was proud. Emma walked toward them quickly.
"You made it," she said.
David looked around the
gallery.
"So this is where the famous artist works." Emma laughed. "I'm not famous." "Give it time," he replied. David spent several minutes walking through the exhibition quietly. He stopped in front of each painting, studying it carefully. Finally, he reached the painting titled The Call That Changed Everything. It showed a phone glowing softly beside a window filled with city lights. David looked at it for a long moment. Then he turned to Emma. "This one is about us, isn't it?" Emma nodded. "Yes." David smiled gently. "I'm glad you answered." Emma felt her chest tighten slightly. "I'm glad you kept calling." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then David placed a hand on her shoulder. "You know something?" he said. "What?" "That blocked call might have been the best mistake we ever made." Emma raised an eyebrow. "How could that be a good thing?" David looked around the room at all the paintings. "Because it led you here." Emma looked around the gallery as well. All the paintings. All the people. All the moments that had led to this night. Maybe her father was right. Sometimes the mistakes we regret the most become the turning points that change our lives. And sometimes all it takes to start that change is answering one call. The exhibition ended later than Emma expected. Guests slowly began leaving the gallery, and the quiet hum of conversations faded into the night. Staff members carefully adjusted lights and began packing some equipment away. Emma stood near the center of the room, looking at her paintings one last time. Her father walked up beside her. "You did well tonight," David said. Emma smiled. "I think people liked the work." "I'm not talking about the paintings," he replied. Emma looked at him. "I'm talking about you." Before she could respond, the gallery owner approached them. "Emma," he said warmly, "I need to tell you something." Emma turned toward him. "Yes, we sold 3 of your paintings tonight." Emma blinked in surprise. "3? "Yes," he said with a grin. "And there are 2 more people interested." Emma felt a rush of disbelief. Only a few months ago, she had been struggling just to pay rent. Now people were buying her art. Her father watched her reaction quietly. "Well," he said. Emma laughed in shock. "I think this means I'm officially a real artist now." David chuckled. "I told you." Later that night, Emma, David, and Sarah sat together in a small cafe across the street from the gallery. The place was quiet, with warm yellow lights and the soft smell of coffee in the air. Emma stirred her drink absent-mindedly. "I still can't believe it," she said. Sarah smiled. "You worked hard for this." David nodded. "And you followed your own path." Emma looked at him. "I was afraid you'd still think I made the wrong choice." David leaned back in his chair. "Emma, parents don't always worry because they doubt their children." Emma tilted her head. "Then why?" "Because they know how difficult the world can be." Emma thought about that. For the first time, she understood something about her father that she had never truly seen before. His strictness, his warnings, his fear. It had never been about control. It had always been about protection. As they finished their drinks, David suddenly looked thoughtful. "There's something I should tell you," he said quietly. Emma looked up. "What is it?" David hesitated for a moment. "The doctors called yesterday." Emma felt her stomach tighten slightly. "And they say the treatment is working better than expected." Sarah smiled with relief. Emma stared at him. "Does that mean?" David nodded slowly. "It means I'll probably be around a lot longer than we thought." For a moment, Emma couldn't speak. Then she stood up from her chair and hugged him tightly. "That's the best news I've heard all year," she said. David laughed softly. "Well, I still need someone to answer my phone calls." Emma stepped back and wiped her eyes. "You won't have to worry about that anymore." David raised an eyebrow playfully. "Promise." Emma took out her phone and held it up. "Promise." And this time, when the phone rang in the future, Emma knew exactly what she would do. She would answer. Every single time. Life slowly settled into a rhythm after the exhibition in Chicago. Emma returned to her apartment with a renewed sense of confidence. More galleries had contacted her, asking about future exhibitions. Some collectors had even requested custom paintings. But the thing that made Emma happiest wasn't the success. It was the peace she felt with her family. She called her parents almost every day. Sometimes the conversations were short. Sometimes they lasted an hour. But they were always warm. One night, several weeks later, Emma was still awake in her studio apartment. It was past midnight, and the city outside her window glowed with quiet lights. She was working on a new painting. The canvas showed a city skyline under a dark sky, with a single window glowing brightly in one of the buildings. Emma dipped her brush into paint when suddenly her phone rang. The sound broke the silence of the room. She looked at the screen. Dad calling. Emma smiled. It had become her favorite notification. She wiped the paint from her fingers and answered. Hey, Dad. But this time something sounded different. David's voice was softer. Emma, are you awake? Yes, she said.
I'm painting.
There was a pause on the line. Then David spoke again. I couldn't sleep. Emma frowned slightly. Are you feeling okay? Yes, he replied quickly.
I'm fine.
But Emma knew her father well enough to hear something behind his voice. What's wrong? She asked gently. Another pause. Then David spoke quietly. I was thinking about something.
What?
About that night when you left. Emma felt her chest tighten slightly. The memory was still painful. What about it? She asked. David sighed softly. I've replayed that conversation in my head many times. Emma leaned back in her chair. So have I. David continued. I keep wondering if I could have said something differently. Emma looked out the window at the quiet city. Maybe, she said. There was a brief silence between them. Then she added softly, but maybe we needed that moment. David seemed surprised. What do you mean? Emma glanced at the painting in front of her. If we never had that argument, I might never have chased my dream.
David thought about that.
And if you never blocked my number, Emma continued, we might never have realized how much those calls mattered. On the other end of the phone, David chuckled quietly. You're turning our biggest mistake into a life lesson. Emma smiled. Artists do that. David laughed a little louder. That's true. They talked for nearly an hour that night. About the past. About the future. About small things that didn't really matter. But before hanging up, David said something that stayed with Emma long after the call ended. Emma? Yes. I'm glad you answered tonight. Emma smiled softly. I'm glad you called. She hung up the phone and looked back at her painting. Then she picked up her brush again. But before she continued, she added something new to the canvas. In the glowing window of the tall building, she painted a small figure standing beside a phone, waiting, ready to answer. Because sometimes the most important calls in life arrive when we least expect them. A few months passed after that late-night phone call. Spring slowly arrived in the city. The cold winter air faded, and sunlight began filling Emma's apartment earlier each morning. Her life had changed in many ways. Her paintings were being shared online. A small art magazine even published an article about her work. The headline read, "The artist who turned missed calls into masterpieces." Emma found the title funny, but she also knew it was true. Many of her best paintings came from one simple idea, moments we almost lost. One afternoon, Emma received another phone call from her father. Emma, David said, are you free this weekend? Maybe, she replied. Why? I was thinking we could take a short trip. Emma raised an eyebrow. A trip? Yes. Where? David paused dramatically. You'll see. Emma laughed. That sounds suspicious. Trust me, he said. Emma thought about it for a moment. Months ago, she might have hesitated. But now the answer came easily. Okay, she said. I'm in. 2 days later, Emma drove with her parents along a quiet highway outside the city. The road stretched through wide fields and small towns. Emma noticed her father seemed unusually calm during the drive. Eventually, David asked her to stop the car near a small hill overlooking a lake. Emma looked around. This place looks familiar. David smiled. It should. Suddenly Emma remembered. This is where we used to come when I was a kid. David nodded. You loved drawing here. Emma stepped out of the car and looked toward the lake. The water reflected the afternoon sunlight, just like it had years ago. I haven't been here in forever, she said softly. David walked beside her. You used to sit on that rock and draw everything you saw. Emma laughed. I remember. I drew trees that looked like broccoli. David chuckled. They were very artistic broccoli. For a few minutes they stood there quietly, watching the water. Then David spoke. You know why I wanted to come here today? Emma shook her head. No, David looked out across the lake. Because this is the first place I realized you were going to be an artist. Emma looked surprised. Really? Yes. You were 8 years old, he said. And you spent 3 hours drawing the same lake. Emma smiled at the memory. I didn't want to miss any details. David nodded slowly. That's when I understood something.
What?
That your dreams were bigger than my plans. Emma felt a warm emotion rise in her chest. And you're okay with that now? She asked. David turned toward her. I'm more than okay with it. He smiled. I'm proud of it. Emma didn't say anything. She simply hugged him again. Standing there beside the lake, she realized something important. For years she had believed that following her dream meant choosing between her future and her family. But now she understood the truth. Sometimes the people who seem to stand in our way are actually the ones who believe in us the most. They just express it differently. As they walked back toward the car, Emma's phone buzzed. She checked the screen. A message from a gallery. We'd like to invite you to a major exhibition in New York. Emma stared at the message in disbelief. Then she looked at her father. Well, she said. Looks like another phone call just changed my life. David laughed. Good thing you answer them now. The message from the New York gallery stayed on Emma's screen long after she first read it. She looked up at her father, still standing beside the quiet lake where she had once drawn her childish pictures of trees and water. New York, she said slowly. David smiled. That sounds big. Emma laughed nervously. It is big. She sat down on the same rock she had used years ago when she was 8 years old. The lake looked exactly the same, calm and reflective. But Emma felt different now. Back then she had drawn without fear. Now every new opportunity felt heavier, almost overwhelming. What if I'm not ready? She said quietly. David sat down beside her. You weren't ready when you first started drawing either. Emma looked at him. That's different. Not really, he replied. She frowned slightly.
How?
David pointed toward the lake. When you were little, you didn't worry about whether your drawings were good enough. Emma smiled. Faintly. I didn't know any better. David nodded. Exactly. Emma watched the sunlight shimmer across the water. For years she had believed success meant reaching a moment where fear disappeared. But maybe that moment never came. Maybe courage wasn't the absence of fear. Maybe courage was simply continuing anyway. David stood up and stretched his arms. So, he said, when do we start planning your New York trip? Emma looked up at him. We. David smiled. You don't think your mother and I are going to miss that, do you? Emma laughed. I guess not. As they walked back toward the car, Emma took out her phone again. She opened the message from the New York gallery. Then she typed a short reply. I would be honored to participate in the exhibition. She pressed send. For a moment she just stared at the screen. Another door had opened. Another chapter was beginning. Emma slipped her phone back into her pocket and looked toward her father. You know something? She said. What? Emma smiled. If you hadn't kept calling me, none of this would have happened. David shrugged playfully. Good thing I'm stubborn. Emma nodded. Yes. Then she added softly, good thing I finally answered. And as they drove away from the lake, Emma realized something she had never fully understood before. Life rarely changes in one dramatic moment. Instead, it changes through small choices. A decision to listen. A decision to forgive. A decision to answer the phone when someone who loves you calls. Sometimes that simple choice can change everything. A few months later, Emma stood in the middle of a bright gallery in New York. The room was larger than any exhibition she had attended before. White walls stretched across the hall, covered with paintings from artists around the world. Visitors moved slowly between them, whispering, discussing, admiring. Emma's paintings hung along the far wall. A small sign beside them read, Emma Carter, featured artist. Emma looked at the words for a moment, hardly believing they were real. Just 1 year ago, she had been sitting alone in a small apartment, wondering if she had made the worst mistake of her life. Now she was here, and the journey had started with something incredibly simple. A phone call. Across the room, she saw her parents walking toward her. Her mother looked proud, her eyes bright with happiness. And beside her was David, standing a little straighter than he had months ago. Emma walked toward them. "Well," she asked nervously, "what do you think?" David looked around the gallery. Then he looked at her paintings. Then back at Emma. "I think," he said slowly, "that 8-year-old girl drawing broccoli trees by the lake would be very proud." Emma laughed. "I hope so." Sarah gently placed a hand on Emma's shoulder. "We're proud too." Emma felt a warmth spread through her chest. For so long she had chased success, believing it would feel like winning a race. But standing there now, she realized something surprising. Success didn't feel like winning. It felt like sharing the moment with the people who had supported her along the way. Later that night, after the exhibition ended, Emma stepped outside the gallery. The New York skyline shimmered with thousands of lights, brighter than any city she had seen before. Her father stood beside her. "You know," David said, "this reminds me of something." "What?" Emma asked. "The night you sat by your window staring at the city lights." Emma smiled. "And blocking her calls?" David laughed. "Yes." Emma shook her head. "I thought blocking you would solve everything." "And did it?" he asked. "No," she said softly. "What solved everything was answering." David nodded. For a moment they both looked out at the glowing city. Then Emma took out her phone and opened her contact list. At the very top was one name. "Dad," she showed it to him. "Still unblocked," she said. David chuckled.
Good.
Emma slipped the phone back into her pocket. "Because now I know something important." "What's that?" Emma looked at him. "No matter how busy life gets, no matter where I go," she smiled, "I will always answer when you call." David didn't say anything for a moment. Then he placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "That's all a father ever hopes for." And as the lights of the city shined around them, Emma realized the real lesson behind her journey. Life will give us many calls. Some from opportunities. Some from strangers. But the most important calls are the ones from the people who love us. And those are the calls we should never ignore.